The subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to analyze the State Department and the USAID's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Western Hemisphere. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. It will be short and, sorry, am I following the right order here? All right, so. As I'm sure you know, no region is more important to the well-being of the United States than Latin America. Miami, the city that I represent, is closer to Cartagena, Colombia, than New York City. Latin America is our back door, is our backyard, a region that is vital for our national security. But unfortunately, actions are speaking louder than words. In the last 4 years, President Biden has made it clear that Latin America is really not a priority for this country. And here are the facts. The president has traveled to 24 countries. He is the first president in 50 years not to visit the Western Hemisphere, just a quick trip to Mexico. Last year, he canceled a visit to Brazil and to Chile with no explanation. Also, he has not designated a single special envoy for crises like migration crisis in Central America, elections in Venezuela, human rights in Cuba, political prisoners in Nicaragua, the southern border, you know, the usual problems. He did not go to Central America and to South America, but he did not invite any of the dignitaries either. What do I mean by that? One of the highest honors given to a foreign dignitary is holding a state dinner at the White House. And you know, at least one country in every continent has had a state dinner except for the Western Hemisphere. And when he speaks to the nation through the State of the Union, there is no mention of Latin America. In the meantime, unfortunately, the Chinese are filling the void. In the last 4 years, Chinese investment has increased by 300% in the region. In 2022 alone, $450 billion in Chinese money have gone to Latin America. And for this reason, today, China has surpassed the United States as the top trading partner in the region. That is a problem for our national security. On top of that is disastrous for our economy, national security, and for the well-being of our allies that are always yearning to do business with the Americans. If we lose Latin America to the Chinese, who are not really very nice actors, we are definitely in trouble, and we lose here at home. So I think that you agree with me that we have to wake up and defend and embrace and be part of this hemisphere in the future years. So I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton, for any statements he may have. Thank you for being here in lieu of Ranking Member Castro.
Thank you very much, Chair Salazar, for hosting this important hearing. Thank you for the witnesses for being here today. The Western Hemisphere is a critical region for the United States, full of our top trading partners and incredible potential for nearshoring and economic growth. But we must be clear-eyed about the challenges. The President's budget recognizes the importance of the region, requesting an additional 7.9% in funding for critical priorities, tackling the flow of fentanyl, improving the rule of law, and addressing the root causes of migration. It is disappointing that the appropriations bill the House voted on just a few weeks ago cut the international affairs budget by 12%. It decreases developmental assistance by over 30%, eliminating all funding for safe mobility offices and underfunding the operations and staffing of the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development. It is an unwise strategy at a time when our strategic competitors continue to grow their influence in the region. Last week, I was in Mexico, where I had the opportunity to meet with President López Obrador and President-elect Sheinbaum as a bipartisan and bicameral congressional delegation. We spoke at length about the untenable security situation in Mexico, where cartels control 1/3 of the country and contributed to the most violent election in Mexico's recent history. We discussed the need for the United States and Mexico to cooperate in combating these cartels and trafficking of synthetic opioids across the border. I represent Arizona, a border state, and I know how important our relationship with Mexico is for the strength of our own economy. Right now, we have an unprecedented opportunity to nearshore our supply chains and capitalize on historic investments made under the CHIPS and Science Act. I urged Dr. Shanebaum to take advantage of this moment, and she was enthusiastic about building Mexico's footprint in the tech space, especially working with Arizona's semiconductor industry. It was a fruitful visit, but there is much more to do to create a reliable environment for direct foreign investment in Mexico and throughout the region. The flow of illicit fentanyl has devastated far too many American families. We have taken important steps to stop the trafficking of fentanyl in the United States, including the recent passage of my bill, the American Cooperation with Our Neighbors Act, which promotes collaboration between state and local entities on both sides of the border to counter fentanyl. As former mayor of Phoenix, I deeply understand the importance of this subnational collaboration and the critical role local authorities play. I urge the Senate to swiftly take up this bill, and I look forward to working with the State Department in formulating an effective plan to combat cartel influence, gang recruitment, and the flow of synthetic opioids and precursor chemicals. We have to reduce migration. In the last 2 months, we've seen unlawful crossings drop by 50% to the lowest level in many, many years. But we must continue to invest in programs like safe mobility offices that disincentivize travel to our southern border. We have to invest in deep diplomatic relationships with our neighbors taking in migrants, and in addressing root causes of migration, including through nearshoring our supply chains, which mainly shores up our national security, but has the added benefit of creating necessary, stable jobs that keep people in their home countries. Venezuela, they will be holding elections this coming Sunday. This is such a consequential moment for Venezuela and comes after years of chaos and tragedy. I know these elections Sunday are not perfect, far from it. The Maduro regime has disqualified legitimate presidential candidates, particularly Ms. Maria Corina Machado. They have attempted to split the opposition and denied access to international observers. But the elections still represent the best opportunity for the Venezuelan people to make their voices heard. The opposition, including Ambassador Edmundo Gonzalez and Ms. Maria Corina Machado, should be commended for their resolve in the face of these actions. And I think the Biden administration, including the State Department, USAID, and the National Security Council, deserves immense credit for doing the hard work of diplomacy to bring us to this important point. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on our efforts to support democracy in Venezuela and what we can expect on Sunday and the days to follow. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks to you, Congressman Stanton. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. Today, we have witnesses from the State Department, the USAID, who handle U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere for the Biden administration. Starting with the Honorable Brian Nichols, who I always appreciate the fact that you always come every time we call you. I mean, I know it's fatiguing, but this is democracy, and I love the fact that you are following the rules. He is the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs for the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs within the United States Department of State. And the Honorable Julieta Valls Noyes is the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration at the United States Department of State. And Mr. Michael Camilleri is the Acting Assistant Administrator for the Bureau of Latin America and the Caribbean for the United States Agency for International Development. And thank you for being here today. Once again, I extend the welcome and the thank you for both of you being here. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep it to 5 minutes in order to allow for time for members to pose their questions. I now recognize the Honorable Brian Nichols for his opening statement.
Chairwoman Salazar, Ranking Member Stanton, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the administration's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Western Hemisphere. The President's budget request includes $2.2 billion in foreign assistance for the Western Hemisphere that addresses the Hemisphere's most pressing challenges, from democratic resilience and irregular migration to economic growth and climate change. Our approach is rooted in the administration's commitment, and the request prioritizes increasing resources for Haiti, migration management, sustaining assistance for Central America, and support for democratic actors, building Caribbean countries' climate and economic resilience, advancing a positive economic agenda across the hemisphere, and countering the influence of the People's Republic of China. Haiti is 650 miles from the United States. We share close historical, familial, cultural, and economic ties. Supporting Haiti and the multinational security support mission ranks as a top foreign assistance priority. The situation in Haiti remains critical, and our funding is essential to improve security on the ground, lay the groundwork for free and fair elections, and encourage additional financial and personnel contributions from other international donors. The 2025 request includes $356.7 million for Haiti across multiple accounts, including funding to support the multinational security support mission. Under the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, endorsed by 22 countries in the region, we have affirmed our collective commitment to respond to migration and forced displacement across the region. The FY 2025 request includes $218.7 million in development, economic, health, and security assistance to ensure the Department of State and USAID can sustain and expand regional efforts to manage migration safely, humanely, and effectively. As we address democratic challenges in the region, we also endeavor to unlock the region's economic potential and ensure democracies can deliver prosperity to their citizens. The Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity represents a pivotal initiative to support economic growth and strengthen our affirmative offer in contrast to our strategic rivals. We also emphatically support a capital increase for IDB Invest, and the administration's budget requests $75 million as a first payment. A reinforced IDB Invest will deliver on key U.S. objectives for the region by bolstering private sector-led growth, building resilient supply chains, creating economic opportunity for entrepreneurs and the middle class, and offering a transparent and accountable alternative to PRC lending in the region. APEP also supports a transparent procurement and regulatory frameworks that open opportunities for our partners and enable them to rely less on the PRC. Central America remains a focal point for our foreign assistance strategy. The FY 2025 request provides $658.6 million in state and USAID bilateral and regional funding, robustly resourcing the 5 pillars of the U.S. strategy for addressing the root causes of migration in the final year of the President's commitment to provide $4 billion over 4 years. This funding will deepen our engagement on priority issues such as migration and security cooperation. It will also foster inclusive economic growth, combat corruption, and safeguard human rights. Through the root causes strategy, we work with diverse partners, including civil society and the private sector. Vice President Harris's Central America Forward initiative has mobilized over $5.2 billion in private sector commitments that have already created over 70,000 jobs in Central America. By addressing the root causes of migration, we aim to create a more stable, prosperous region where citizens can thrive in their homelands and benefit their communities while avoiding the dangerous journey of irregular migration. The Caribbean remains another critical area of focus. The FY 2025 budget provides over $190 million across various accounts to strengthen the region's ability to withstand climate shocks, respond to natural disasters, build energy resilience, and support conservation efforts. The restoration of democracy in Venezuela remains at the center of our foreign policy. We continue to harness all diplomatic tools and leverage sanctions to this end, including working with Venezuelans and regional and international partners to encourage Maduro and his representatives to hold a competitive and inclusive election on July 28th. The FY 2025 request includes nearly $54 million to support these and other efforts, including critical health support. While we are clear-eyed about the prospects for a competitive election on July 28th, we must prepare for a scenario that Venezuela returns to democratic rule in the future. In conclusion, the FY 2025 request for the Western Hemisphere reflects our commitment to address the Hemisphere's biggest challenges through a partnership-driven foreign policy. Our efforts are guided by the principles of democracy, human rights, economic growth, and security, as well as a focus on fostering strong partnerships. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss our foreign assistance request for the Western Hemisphere, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Nichols. Now I recognize the Honorable Julieta Valls Noyes for her opening statement.
Good morning, Chairwoman Salazar, Ranking Member Stanton, and distinguished members of this committee. I am pleased to be here today to discuss the fiscal year 2025 Migration and Refugee Assistance, or MRA, budget request for the humanitarian needs of refugees and displaced and stateless persons in the Western Hemisphere. There are more than 120 million forcibly displaced people around the world, and more than 21 million of them are here in the Western Hemisphere. Violence, crime, persecution, human rights abuses, and natural disasters are driving them from their homes. Millions of people are also on the move in search of economic opportunity or family reunification. While these movements create complex challenges, it is important to note that the vast majority of the displaced persons in this hemisphere are not coming to the United States, but rebuilding their lives in other countries. The FY 2025 MRA budget request includes $475 million for humanitarian programming in the Western Hemisphere and $300 million for the Safe Mobility Initiative. It would provide life-saving assistance for those in need and help integrate refugees and vulnerable migrants into communities closer to their countries of origin. The administration will support these solutions through robust humanitarian diplomacy. The request advances a holistic approach to forced displacement and migration management in the Western Hemisphere. The funding in the budget request is intended to strengthen national asylum, registration, regularization, and integration frameworks, prevent the forcible return of persons to a place where they would be persecuted or tortured, protect and assist the most vulnerable refugees and migrants, and increase refugee resettlement and other lawful migration pathways. The MRA funds Congress has generously provided in this and previous fiscal years have had a significant impact in stabilizing displaced populations and host communities throughout the hemisphere. By strengthening access to legal status, including asylum and regularization, displaced people in the region can find employment and stability in their countries of first refuge, rather than undertaking dangerous journeys north. For example, PRM has provided nearly $400 million since 2021 to support over 2.5 million Venezuelans settled in Colombia. Supporting legal status and integration of displaced persons in partner countries is a critical aspect of our strategy. The Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration also continues to prioritize assistance to people with dire needs. This budget request supports our core mandate to provide life-saving assistance and protection to refugees, asylum seekers, vulnerable migrants, and stateless persons. It will fund water, nutrition and hygiene support, urgent health care, and basic humanitarian aid to the most vulnerable, where they are. It will help reunify displaced, separated children from their families, provide medical and psychosocial support to survivors of gender-based violence, and help meet the basic needs of especially vulnerable refugees and displaced populations. To increase regional cooperation, PRM also supports our partners' humane migration management, strengthening their protection systems, policies, border management, and emergency response preparedness. For example, our programs in Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Honduras have advanced adoption of new national strategies for safe, orderly, and humane migration management. The budget request will also strengthen lawful migration and protection pathways, providing a critical alternative to irregular migration. The Safe Mobility Initiative facilitates access to information for migrants about local integration and other options to prevent irregular migration. It supports safe and lawful migration pathways, so refugees do not have to undertake dangerous journeys in search of safety. For those with protection needs, the Safe Mobility Initiative has provided expedited refugee resettlement to both the United States and other countries. Safe Mobility offices are operational now in Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Ecuador. In closing, I'd like to thank the members of this committee for the opportunity to discuss the President's budget request. The United States humanitarian diplomacy, assistance, and durable solutions are key aspects of our approach in this hemisphere. PRM advocacy also encourages other governments to step up as hosts, donors, and resettlement countries to protect the most vulnerable. We are pursuing contributions and greater collaboration from other governments, international financial institutions, and the private sector to address these needs. The FY 2025 budget will support U.S. leadership to save lives, alleviate suffering, provide protection, and advance durable solutions to today's historic levels of forced displacement in the Western Hemisphere and globally. I appreciate your support and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Noyes. I now recognize Mr. Camilleri for his opening statement.
Chair Salazar, Ranking Member Stanton, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's fiscal year 2025 budget request for Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a pivotal moment. Our investments today will shape the region and our own national security for decades to come. In Haiti, USAID programs continue despite significant challenges on the ground, providing humanitarian and food security assistance, supporting health clinics, expanding economic opportunity, and strengthening citizen security. With support from the Multinational Security Support Mission, the Haitian government is taking steps towards stability and paving the way for free and fair elections. USAID is supporting these efforts, including by providing identification cards that will facilitate more than 2 million people voting. Across the hemisphere, we look for opportunities to surge efforts where democratic leaders seek to promote reform. The budget request prioritizes this approach in the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, and Guatemala, which is rejecting corruption and the PRC's economic coercion in favor of accountability and inclusive economic growth. In more challenging environments, USAID supports the civil society groups documenting abuses and fighting for individuals' human rights and fundamental freedoms. For example, in Venezuela, courageous citizens have responded to years of repression by mobilizing for democratic change. USAID has been proud to support these efforts, which have been instrumental in the lead up to this weekend's elections. USAID's investments can lead to long-lasting impact. In Colombia, our decades-long partnership has helped the country move towards peace. The requested budget would allow us to continue efforts with national and local government institutions, civil society, and other partners to implement the peace accord and address key challenges, including migration and coca production. Across the hemisphere, migration is at historic levels. In response, USAID's strategy supports integration, expands lawful pathways, and addresses root causes. In Colombia, USAID, together with our PRM counterparts, has helped more than 2 million individuals obtain legal residency. We support one-stop shops where migrants can access schools, healthcare, bank accounts, and jobs, and rebuild their lives. In Peru, we have supported degree validation so migrants can contribute their full potential to their host countries. USAID also works to reduce irregular migration by expanding access to lawful pathways that provide access to temporary work opportunities abroad. We have strengthened the capacity of our government counterparts in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, allowing them to nearly triple their citizens' access to H-2 temporary work visas. Finally, under the administration's root causes strategy, USAID supports good jobs, safe communities, and more transparent, accountable institutions. These initiatives help mitigate some of the push factors that lead people to leave their homes. Indeed, both intentions and actual migration from Northern Central America have fallen significantly since the strategy was launched. As the region's challenges continue to evolve, USAID is working to meet them. In the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic that took such a toll in the Americas, our global health security programs work to detect public health threats, enable rapid response, and prevent threats from turning into regional or global crises. In the Caribbean and across the region, we're helping to provide early warning systems that will help save lives, drought and heat-resistant crops that provide a more reliable source of food, and secure, affordable, and clean energy. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today about how USAID works to advance America's interests and build a more secure, democratic, and prosperous hemisphere. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Camilleri, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Nichols, and we're going to start with Venezuela. We're 4 days away, probably from the most important event in the recent history of that country. Edmundo is the opposition. He is leading the polls by 30 points, according to what we have access to. That means around 3 million votes. You and I know that President Maduro is in the business of power, and his intention is not to concede, but he is at a major disadvantage. So my question to you is, do you know what type of fraud they are planning to put together? What are they planning to do? Stuff the ballots, change the starmatics, el voto asistido, asking for a photo of your ballot. I mean, whatever. What info do you have? Do you recognize first and foremost that they're going to try to steal the election? Yes or no?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Well, we've already seen important steps that the Maduro side has taken, disqualifying 2 earlier opposition candidates, harassing opposition campaign workers, arresting them, vandalizing vehicles, punishing people that provide support. So we've already seen.
So let's put that aside. I understand, I agree with you that they tried, but now we're in the show. So how are they going to try to steal the show? What info do you have?
Well, I think the key barometer early on will be turnout for the vote. And as you note, polls indicate a significant lead for the opposition. And we expect that if they're able to turn out their voters, they should perform well.
But what info do you have? What are the schemes they're trying to put together? Do you have that info? Because something they're planning. What is it that they're planning? I cannot figure it out because there are many different ways, but I want to ask the State Department, what are you guys expecting?
I don't have any specific information on what the Maduro side might do. What I will say is that this election represents a major opportunity for Venezuela to return to the community of nations and to have an opportunity for a better future.
But you know that that's not Maduro's plan. I mean, they're in the business of power. What do you mean conceding victory? You're giving power away. No, that's not part of the agenda. So since we know that is not part of the agenda, so what can we do in order to, can we talk to Lula? Can we put more pressure? I mean, we are the United States, and you guys are in charge. What can we do to send the message to Maduro after, let's say, polls are going to close at 7 o'clock at night? I mean, I've covered this before as a journalist. So let's say by 2 o'clock in the morning, they're still counting. We know. So what are we going to do in those key hours? We meaning the United States, you, the State Department. You're going to pick up the phone, and what are you guys going to do?
We continue to engage with partners from around the world to maintain a united
Who are
front.
those partners? Tell me. Who are you calling as an ally to call Maduro and say, you got to go, guy?
Well, I think we're like-minded with countries throughout the hemisphere: Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Argentina,
Have you enlisted
Chile.
them already? Have you been talking to them and say, hey, I need you to be on standby?
During the OAS General Assembly in Asunción, Paraguay, we had the opportunity to talk to more than a dozen partners from around the hemisphere about key issues, including our collective support for democracy in Venezuela. Secretary Blinken engaged the dozen colleagues during the ministerial meeting of America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity.
Mr. Nichols, I understand everything you've told me, and I'm on your side. I just want to hear something more forceful, that we, the United States, in this magnificent moment of biblical proportions for the history of the Venezuelans, that we are going to be a little bit more forceful. But I hear what you're telling me. Is there anything else that you want to share with us? I have another question. I know that Maduro, when he realized that he's 3 million votes down, he calls the Biden administration through Jorge Rodriguez, who is one of the top lieutenants next to Maduro. Can you share with us what was discussed? That happened, earlier this month. They picked up the phone, they called Biden administration. What did they say?
So we did have a conversation with some of the Maduro side representatives. They expressed their unhappiness about
About what? That they're going to lose?
about the fact that we have not lifted sanctions.
Okay, yeah, right.
And we expressed our disappointment at the disqualification of earlier candidates and our hope that this would be a competitive election. And
what did they say to that? Of
well,
course,
I'm not going to get into all of the back and forth that we had in a negotiation, but I will say
Was
that
something negotiated?
We value the channel of communication that we have, and it's important as we go forward to be able to have conversations between our two governments, between our government and the Maduro
But you
side.
cannot share with us anything that was spoken specifically or negotiated in that.
I'm not going to get into the
All right,
contents
what
of
about
different
in
arguments.
Qatar last year? There was also a discussion between Biden administration officials and the Maduro regime. Was a transition discussed?
As part the pending phase of the Barbados agreement talked about the next phase would be some type of a civic pact and a discussion of what would happen from the time of the election until the January inauguration of whomever the victor is in the election. All of those discussions are still pending.
Moving forward, the morning after, Maduro comes out and says, I won by 50.315. What are we going to do if we know that they stole the elections just like they have done before? What's going to be our first reaction?
Well, under Venezuelan electoral law, their electoral council has until the following day to announce the results, and then August 2nd, they're supposed to publish detailed results. There'll be international observers on the ground. There'll be thousands of domestic poll watchers from the opposition as well as from parties that support the Maduro side. We want to look, and there'll be international diplomats present. We want to look at all the information. We're not going to rush to judgment, and then we will make a decision.
All right, and then we'll be in touch, because as you said, we both agree on the fact that the Venezuelans deserve to be free and choose their own leaders. Now, I just want to have a little bit more time. After that, we have to, I'm trying to be courteous to my fellow members of the committee. All right, Vice President Kamala has been in charge of the border. Her visits have been considered, I'm not saying it, the headlines say it, that a failure. Right there you have CNN, that it's a pretty friendly news outlet for the Democrats, saying that the problem is now much bigger. That's not a very good headline to Vice President Harris. She goes to Guatemala, and then she implies that the country is corrupt in this press conference that she puts together with Giammattei, who was the president at the time. And she tells the Guatemalans right there on the air, hey, don't come, don't come. Then she was assigned to go to El Salvador, where real progress, we met in El Salvador, has been made to address the root causes of migration. So in other words, Madam Harris is now in a very peculiar position. Probably everything indicates that she's going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. And I just want to ask you, what grade would you give her? According to the headlines, she gets an F in the job or in the assignment that she was given by the president to control or to be the border czar. What grade do you give her?
So Vice President Harris launched the U.S. root causes strategy to tackle the drivers of irregular migration by improving conditions in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras so people do not feel compelled to leave their homes. She leads the implementation of this strategy. The root causes strategy is on track to provide $4 billion in U.S. investment to the region over 4 years.
Mr. Nichols, she hasn't even gone to the border.
So
I mean, just give me a little better explanation.
arrivals at the U.S. border from the countries in Central America are down dramatically
But
over
that
the
was
last
5
4
minutes
years.
ago. I mean, that happened 5 minutes ago during 20, 21, 22, 23. We know reality. I mean, I just want to get some truth statements from you. I mean, why do you think that she failed so dismally at this job that she was given? Why didn't she pay any attention to the southern border be one of the most important topics affecting the national security of this country? Do you have any explanation?
I think this has been a dramatic success. We've seen double-digit drops in arrivals at the U.S. southern border from every country we measure, up to 96% drops. Even the Central American country that's had the lowest drop is still a 26% drop over the last year. Arrivals at their lowest level since before this administration took office. Vice President has mobilized over $5.2 billion in commitments for investment in the region, generating over 70,000 jobs.
You are a great
through
soldier.
Private sector.
I think you're doing a great
investment in
job. Let
the
me just,
region.
you're doing a great job. I think that they are really definitely going to reward you for your assistance in this hearing. Let me just go to Colombia now. There are many accusations right now about President Petro's personal life. I may be tough, but I do not want to pry into anyone's private life, much less in public, all right? But the issue is that he is constantly late and has to cancel many meetings. Not only that, he has missed 150 public engagements during his presidency. Are you aware of this?
I hadn't seen that specific statistic.
150 public engagements. In the last week, during the 20 de Julio, July 20th parade, which celebrated an important date for the Colombians, that parade had to start without the president because he was more than 3 hours late. Recently, even more damaging, I think, for his image, he was spotted walking hand in hand with a woman who was not his wife, who appears to be Lady Linda Yepes, who is a trans woman who was a host on the program Buen Dia in Colombia through RCN, one of the main networks in Colombia. When did that happen? During the inauguration of Jose Raul Mulino in Panama. The pictures are there for everyone to see. He has admitted that he has been drunk at many public events. So my question to you is this. Do you think that, that what I just mentioned and the concerns from some Colombians is affecting these dalliances and this new ways of conducting his private life are affecting his ability to govern? What do you think about that?
Our relationship is with the nation of Colombia. It goes back 2 centuries. They are some of our closest allies in the world. We work with them across a whole host of issues.
Mr. Nichols, but he's the one. He's
that
the one.
relationship
He's the
goes
one conducting the ship.
beyond any single individual, and we will focus on our government-to-government relationship with
Aren't you
Colombia.
concerned about that erratic behavior from one of our top allies?
I'm not in a position to verify or to comment on the specific allegations.
So
that you
why don't we
referenced.
then, after the hearing, we could have a conversation and we can continue talking about this because this is just not, this type of behavior is not very presidential for an ally as close as you just mentioned. Now I'm going to yield back so I can give an opportunity to gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton, and thank you very much for your patience. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think we have votes that we're going to have to go to in just a moment. And I think because of all the activities on Capitol Hill today, including the Prime Minister of Israel, who's coming to give a speech, we won't come back after votes. I'll just speak for maybe a minute or two and then call it a day because we don't want to be late for votes. But I just want to say first, in response to your comments, we will be paying close attention to what happens in Venezuela, and if there are irregularities, I look forward to working with you. And I know you asked the administration about their response, but I look forward to working with you on an appropriate congressional response to any irregularities in that. As it involves the vice president, you gave her a poor grade for her involvement in immigration and border security. I'd say we need to actually look in the mirror and say Congress is actually the entity that needs to step up to the plate and finally pass a real border security plan in a bipartisan way, real immigration reform, a real policy as it relates to trade with Mexico, Central Latin America, and a real policy as it relates to the root causes of migration. And the failure of Congress to be able to come together in a bipartisan way to do that has led to so many of the challenges that we are discussing right here today. And the failure of Congress to pass common sense policies on border, immigration, trade, and root causes is one of the great failures of this Congress. But Chair, I want to compliment you because you have been someone that has put forward and worked in a bipartisan way and put forward a real plan, a real bipartisan plan, I know with real political risk to do that. And I just want to personally compliment you, and I wish there were more like you that are willing to reach across the aisle, come together in a bipartisan way, take political risk, because it's going to take real political risk on both sides to get this done. But we can do this in Congress. We shouldn't cast blame on other people because it's Congress that has to take this important step. And with that, we're going to close out the hearing because we got votes, and I know we have an important speech later, so
Sure.
I don't want to force
Well-
everyone to come back. So thank you for being here.
And we are coming back according to the staff, and the committee will recess until 11 o'clock for votes. No, we're going to come back at 11. So we may be coming back at 11, and if you don't mind staying and continue with our questioning, we very much appreciate it. We'll reconvene then at 11. The committee will come to order. Now I recognize Congressman Huizenga for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, if you don't mind indulging me, I know that there's been a lot of debate about who's in charge of the border, who's been assigned a task to deal with the border. Some have used the term border czar. Maybe czarina would be more applicable. For clarity's sake, I do want to add, if you don't mind, a AP article from March 24 of 2021. The headline is Biden taps VP Harris to lead response to border challenges. And I'm going to read the very first paragraph. President Joe Biden has tapped Vice President Kamala Harris to lead the White House effort to tackle the migration challenge at the U.S. southern border and work with Central American nations to address root causes of the problem, close quote. And I'd like to submit that for the record. Because I think it is important that we have clarity about not only what has been happening, but what the response has been and the responsibility of that. I'm going to start, frankly, in a slightly different direction, though. I'd like to talk about China and the Chinese nationals. More Chinese nationals have presented themselves at the border this current fiscal year than in the entirety of fiscal year 2023. And I would like to hear Secretary Nichols, is the administration concerned about the intent, not just numbers, but the intent of the Chinese nationals when they arrive? And is there any indication that they are connected to the CCP either overtly or covertly?
Well, I think the arrival of migrants from the PRC is a stunning indictment of the leadership of that nation. The PRC's economic slowdown, government repression, that's what's driving this increase in migrants. And migrants arrive from all regions in China, and the majority of the migrants are middle class and professionally skilled. We continue working with partners to identify countries of concern and coordinate responses to disrupt flows, whether they be from China or any place else.
So you don't believe there's any nefarious intent behind this? This is just people trying to flee a lousy China's economic policy.
I think it's driven by people's deep dissatisfaction with the lives that they have. People don't pick up and leave where they are.
Well, we have slightly different views of the PRC and the CCP and their motives, and we know that this isn't just happening at the southern border. I happen to be the chair of the U.S.-Canada IPG. I live in Michigan. I'm very familiar with the northern border. 2/3 of all of those who have been caught, not the getaways, but who have been caught, who have been on the terrorist watch list, have been actually at the northern border, not at the southern border. There's two borders that have been exploited here. And I'll give you another example. So my wife used to be Canadian, has family in Canada. I'm sure you're familiar with what a Nexus card is, correct? Okay, Nexus card is a unique joint U.S.-Canada permit that allows easier travel for those that sit in front of both a U.S. and Canadian Border Patrol at the same time. It's a very unique thing. So recently, while my wife was getting her Nexus card, I was with her and was talking to one of our Border Patrol agents in Detroit. And I said, hey, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? About 3 questions in, he looked at me and said, what do you do exactly? Because it was fairly specific in my questions. And he was indicating to me that, my question was, is the northern border more vulnerable because of what's been happening at the southern border? And he said, absolutely, sir. He said, we have mandatory 6 months rotations. It's voluntary at first, but if they don't have enough spots to fill, they are moving us off of the northern border down to the southern border. And he happened to be in the El Paso area for 6 months, just recently. He recounted a story about how a family showed up from Brazil, said they were very well dressed, very nice luggage, and we started asking them and interrogating them, what are you doing? And where do you plan to go? Well, it turns out, according to him, turns out that this family, almost everybody in the family could get a visa, except for the dad. They were trying to go to Disney World. I kid you not. So they all flew to Mexico and decided to come across the border. They did their vacation, and then, according to him, presumably they left, because he said they gave us no indication that they actually wanted to stay in the country. This is how porous the border is right now, and how ineffective, in my opinion, the enforcement of current law has been, where we have potentially people looking to come to the United States for vacation purposes, not just economic purposes, but we have such a reputation for what's going on. And I cannot fathom, this family from Brazil may not have had nefarious reasons to be here. They wanted to go see Mickey and Minnie. But guess what? The people from China and from a lot of other places may not have that same motive. And what I'm trying to figure out is how this administration can argue that after hundreds of millions of dollars has been spent in Central America to curb migration, we haven't seen that. After all of the other, quote, additional enforcement, we're seeing a clearly more porous border than we ever have. And how do I look at my constituents and my taxpayers and say, this isn't a waste of your money? I mean, that's what we're here today to talk about, right, is the request from state about getting more money to put into these programs, which I would argue have not been effective. So please try to convince me here briefly.
So with regard to Central America and our root causes strategy, I just note over the last 12 months, arrivals from nationals from Guatemala are down 75%, from Honduras down 86%, and from El Salvador down 27%, and they were already at a very low level.
Any of that seasonal?
No, this is...
No, none of it's seasonal?
This is...
Come on.
We're at the lowest levels we've been since before this administration took office.
Sir, we know that there's seasonality to border crossings. We know that.
The other
there were 400,000 legally inadmissible aliens that we know about that that the mass parole program has allowed. 400,000 legally inadmissible aliens have been flown directly into the interior of the United States. I actually have a bill that would require you all to report to members of Congress and to governors when that happens, because we're in the dark. We don't know about that until they land. We've had examples of that in Michigan as well. And by the way, Madam Chair, I'm sure you are very well aware of this. Numerous migrant caravans of thousands of people are still continuing to go. On Monday of this week, the AP reported that another migrant caravan left southern Mexico on foot, heading for the U.S. border. And the article states, quote, some of the members of the group said they hoped to make it to the U.S. border before elections are held in November because they fear that if Donald Trump wins, he will follow through on his promise to close the border, close quote. That's the AP. That does not sound like a border under control to me or an actual working strategy. So that is part of my hesitancy in granting more, hundreds of millions of dollars more to these programs. I'm well over my time, Madam Chair. I appreciate the indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Huizenga. Now I recognize Congressman Self for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would point to one of your comments about Haiti and moving towards stability. That Haiti has been unstable for decades, and I will point you to the Chicago Cubs fans. They thought it was going to be different next year for decades. It finally was, but it took decades for it to be different. I think using the word stability in the same sentence as Haiti is a rosy projection at best. I've heard nothing but rosy projections from all three of your testimonies here. And yet we know, if every report is right, that the CCP is making tremendous gains throughout the Western Hemisphere. So the first question is, I want to know what kinds of activities does the Countering PRC Influence Fund support in the region, and what impact do you think that has? Mr. Nichols?
So among the things that we seek to do is educate populaces on the reality of the deals on offer from the PRC, whether that's investment or media or cultural centers, and educate people on what's really on offer, what the terms of credit that their countries might receive. We seek to provide financing for key infrastructure projects and other investments in countries in the region.
That's a great point. So what is your percentage of the PRC spending in Western Hemisphere?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question, sir.
How does your spending compare to the DFC or whatever? What is our soft power spending in the Western Hemisphere? How does it compare to what CCP is spending? Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I could speak to that perhaps in the space of humanitarian assistance.
Well, I'm looking at a total cost. I think we are being vastly outspent. And frankly, in one of our previous hearings, the State Department was bragging about being the chief investment partner of the Western Hemisphere instead of the chief trading partner. And I think that bodes us no good. Now, Argentina apparently has most of the rare earth minerals that we need. And rare earth minerals, frankly, are not that rare. Alaska alone has 49 out of the 50 rare earth minerals, and yet the Biden administration is trying to turn it into one large national park. But Argentina has many of them as well. So what would you do to try to get us rare earth minerals, of which China controls some 90% around the world? So as long as we're talking about investment in South America, what would you do to try to get us rare earth minerals out of Argentina? Because we now have a government that I think would be amenable to that idea.
We have an excellent relationship with the Malay government in Argentina. Under the leadership of Undersecretary Jose Fernandez, we have engaged in discussions about promoting U.S. investment in the critical mineral sectors in countries like Argentina, Chile, Peru, and around the region. That means engaging partners, ensuring that policies are in place in countries that welcome foreign direct investment and U.S. investment. In the case of Argentina specifically, mineral resources, subsoil resources are controlled by the provinces and not by the central government. So that means working with governors, and our embassy engages with the governors
that's process,
around
but what are you doing to encourage U.S. companies to go get the rare earths that we need?
That means working with nations to create an environment that is welcoming to foreign direct investment, working with the private sector in the United States to share opportunities for investment.
That's generalities, though, Mr. Nichols. What are you doing
Leading trade delegations to countries in the region, working with our partners in the Department of Commerce to facilitate visits by businesses around the hemisphere, engaging with private sector organizations like BCIU, Council of the Americas, U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Let me ask you this then. Those countries that you've named, is China extracting rare earths out of those countries?
Yes.
And have we started?
Well, in some cases, there are, in Chile and Peru, there are U.S. mines that do mine critical minerals in those countries.
I will just make the point that I think our soft power has gotten a little soft. We need to be going after these things that our industry needs in great quantities, and we need to be reducing our reliance on China.
I agree
I yield
100%
back,
on
Madam
that
Chair.
point. I agree, and we need to do more. We need to fund DFC. We need to fund the Inter-American Development Bank so that the financing piece is there for these multi-billion-dollar investments.
Thank you, Congressman Self. Now I recognize Mr. Stanton from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. During last week's congressional delegation trip to Mexico, I did have the opportunity to speak with President-elect Sheinbaum about the security situation in Mexico and the power that cartels yield to inflict violence and ship fentanyl illegally across our border. We have an opportunity now to curb cartel activity. In most of Mexico, police act as first responders, but they don't investigate crime. That is instead led by prosecutors' offices that are too small to effectively investigate and prosecute crime. As mayor of Mexico City, Dr. Sheinbaum allowed police to investigate crimes and hire more investigators, worked with the United States security officials, and ultimately reduced crime by almost 60%. We need to seize this opportunity for deeper cross-border collaboration to combat the cartels, including and especially stopping the flow of illicit fentanyl. Assistant Secretary Nichols, how does the State Department plan to work with the incoming administration in Mexico to combat the flow of fentanyl and build upon the commitments of the U.S.-Mexico Bicentennial Framework for Security, Public Health, and Safe Communities, and how do proposed budget cuts affect those plans?
We work intensively with the current Mexican government, and we have begun to consult with the incoming government about our cooperation on law enforcement issues, and there's no issue more vital to the security and welfare of Americans than combating fentanyl trafficking into our country. That means continuing to work to identify chemical precursor suppliers into Mexico, identifying clandestine labs in Mexico, using intelligence-driven operations to disrupt the financing of drug cartels, supporting vetted investigative units in Mexico, and making sure that that partnership, in addition to our bilateral engagement, works with other key partners around the hemisphere and around the world to combat this scourge.
This is a key moment in the relationship with Mexico, Central Latin America, particularly on the issue of the nearshoring opportunity, this unique nearshoring moment, capitalizing growth with our trade partner, Mexico, and preparing for the upcoming review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. Earlier this month, this committee, in a bipartisan way, passed reauthorization of the BUILD Act, which allows the Development Finance Corporation more flexibility to invest in Latin America, including in the semiconductor industry. These investments would shore up U.S. national security, give the United States more tools to compete with China, and create stable jobs in Latin America that contribute to a regional semiconductor ecosystem. Assistant Secretary Nichols, how does nearshoring bolster our national security, and what can be done to ensure regional security in the Western Hemisphere, creating a more reliable business environment and limiting crossings into the United States?
Diversified supply chains provide greater security to the United States. We've already seen what can happen when a region of the world or international trade is disrupted, as it was during the pandemic. Having supply chains closer to home means that we will have access to those important inputs and resources for our nation. It creates good, high-paying jobs in our region, which gives people an incentive to stay at home rather than migrate to the United States. It creates economic growth that strengthens democracy and provides better trading partners for the United States. Recently, Secretary Blinken hosted foreign ministers as part of the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity. 11 other foreign ministers were there talking about how we can promote these measures in the Western Hemisphere, including from Mexico, as well as Central American countries that are attracting investment like Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic.
Safe mobility offices, they help to reestablish operational control at the southern border, and they disincentivize travel to our southern border. To date, 4 existing SMOs in Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Guatemala have processed more than 21,000 people. USCIS recently told my office that strides made by the SMOs are, quote, proof of concept, but acknowledges that there is room to grow, room for improvement. Assistant Secretary Noyes, what resources are required to expand the impact and reach of the SMOs and preserve regional security? And how is the administration engaging governments around the world on SMO activities?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. The administration request for a Safe Mobility Initiative in fiscal year 2025 is $300 million. Those funds would be used to manage the operations of the Safe Mobility offices, but in addition to that, we're engaging in robust diplomacy with our partners, including through the Resettlement Diplomacy Network, which is an informal grouping of countries to enhance refugee resettlement by our partners. We recently led a visit by a number of partners from Europe, the Americas, and Asia to visit the Safe Mobility Office in Colombia, and part of our effort will be to continue to expand that outreach and to expand the opportunities for other countries to provide lawful pathways to migrants within our hemisphere to their regions. There are a lot of countries in the world that have labor shortages and that could provide safety as well as labor opportunities for those migrants. So this is an opportunity that allows everyone to win.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Stanton, and I'm going to then recognize myself for 5 minutes. I have a question for each one of you. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Nichols, about El Salvador. You and I, we were at the second inaugural for President Bukele. We agreed that the guy has done a great job, that he has secured and eradicated the roots of violence in El Salvador. Now he's starting a second phase to bring prosperity and to bring investments, American investments, and to be able to grow the economy. But they need international financing. They need for the United States to bless them so the international banking community opens up and starts giving them loans. Are we ready to bless the Bukele administration so they can start that second phase and bring prosperity, economic prosperity to the country?
So we very much want to work with the government of El Salvador to promote economic growth in the country. I think among the challenges to increasing the levels of foreign direct investment in El Salvador are ensuring that the system of rule of law in El Salvador is transparent and gives investors equitable treatment, and that's something that we want to work with this government on. And I know from the conversations we had when we were in country at the same time that President Bukele is interested in working with us on that.
Are we interested in working with him?
Yeah, yes, we had a high-level delegation to his inauguration, and we want to work with his government on these issues. There are a number of things that we think will improve the economic situation in El Salvador, but the United States is not the only actor in this space, and obviously—
But you know it's always the most important one, because everyone wants American companies to go and set up shop and absorb some of the labor force and bring prosperity. You know, the Americans, that's why we're in this hearing, because everyone wants to deal, everyone meaning the Western Hemisphere, wants to deal with the American, not only American governments, but the American companies, everything that says USA. Do you agree?
Well, let me give you a specific example of a concern that we expressed, which is limitations on the use of cloud servers in the financial services sector. So that means that the most secure ways of storing financial information are not available to U.S. companies or their customers for things like mortgages, for example. So all that information has to be stored in El Salvador under their current laws. Allowing cloud data services would allow greater security and would meet the high standards that U.S. and other international companies expect. So working with the government of El Salvador to change that requirement is something that would immediately improve the investment environment.
Well, those are technical details that I am sure, if there's political willingness, will be able to be worked out. Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Now, I'm going to ask you, Secretary Valls, Could you explain to us the new migration policy that was negotiated between the Biden administration and the new president of Panama, Jose Raul Molino? Why do I say that? Because right now, the Darien Gap, which is that magic place where everyone has to go through, meaning everyone that is not in Central America, needs to go through in order to get to the United States. We're only talking about 30 miles, and that's why we believe that the influx of people coming through the southern border has been reduced. So to the present numbers that we have been discussing. What was negotiated?
Thank you, Congresswoman. During the inauguration of President Molino in Panama, the head of the U.S. delegation, Secretary Mayorkas, signed an MOU with the new foreign minister of Panama that would facilitate U.S. assistance, technical training, capacity building for Panamanian migration officials to assist them in conducting repatriation flights for individuals who do not have international protection concerns. It was an agreement that we had negotiated for several months, but that satisfied the requirements or the desire to repatriate those who didn't have a legal basis for remaining, but also providing protection concerns to make sure that the repatriations didn't include people who had fear of persecution or torture.
No, I understand, but why do you think it was negotiated now in 24? Why couldn't we do that in 21 or in 22?
The negotiations began earlier and took a while to come to conclusion, and President Molino, upon entering into office, agreed to sign. So those negotiations had been going on for some time before that.
And are you satisfied with the results up to now?
Yes.
All right. Now, Mr. Camilleri, when I was a news reporter, USAID, it was the star. Everyone wants to deal with, every country in Latin America would love to have USAID help and presence and agents and staff. So it's the pretty face of the United States, it's the noble face. It's like the signature agency that takes prosperity, hope, our American values. So I hold the USAID in high regard. So I want to ask you, that is our role. We know that we should be investing a lot more money, a lot more resources, more people, more of everything, because that's like the American flag when it comes to non-political and non-military aid. Are the Chinese, what are they doing in order to counteract that noble purpose that USAID has?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the support for USAID's work. I think we feel proud of the work we do in the region for precisely the reasons that you know so well, having spent so much time with the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. Certainly the strategic environment in the Americas has evolved. We have strategic competitors, the PRC, probably principal among them. And so now more than ever, it is critical that we have the resources to invest in the things that USAID does so well, working with our interagency partners.
But what are they doing?
Well,
what are they doing that we're not?
Their model is different than ours in a couple of ways. One is that they burden countries with debt. So for every $10 that the Chinese bring to the table, $9 of it is debt and $1 of it is aid.
You see right there, look at how noble this country is. Out of 10, 9 we give, 1 we lend. They, the Chinese, they're communist, obviously, they lend to 9, that means that you gotta pay me back, and 1 is given for free.
On top of that, I think we're seeing significant.
That's important for you to stress.
It's absolutely critical and it is, I think, increasingly apparent to our partners in the region why the United States should remain the partner of choice, not just because we're bringing aid to the table rather than burdening these countries with debt, but the quality of what we bring to the table, the values that we imbue our programs with, is distinguishing us from what the PRC brings in terms of the corruption that often is associated with their projects, the shoddy infrastructure, the debt burden, as I mentioned. So we think that our
what about social programs? Like I know that you have gender identity programs, you have all types of social programs. to teach English, to learn how to put together a bank account, right? To teach some of the residents of Guatemala, let's say, how to open up a business. So do they do something similar is what I'm saying. I don't know the answer to this.
That kind of programming is more what we do versus what we do. The rooted programming in local communities, the deep knowledge and dialogue with those communities in areas like financial literacy, to mention one that you mentioned. The values, again, the democratic American values that imbue those programs, that is a distinguishing characteristic of the way the United States does foreign assistance, and I would argue a comparative advantage that we have over the PRC.
Yes, ma'am.
Chairwoman, if I could just jump in. The United States, in terms of humanitarian assistance, we lead with our values. And I'd like to give a specific example. In 2022, the United States was, as it always is, the largest single country donor of humanitarian assistance funds in the world. In 2022, the last year for which we have statistics for China, the United States provided $17 billion in humanitarian assistance to save lives, alleviate suffering, provide protection to the most vulnerable people. In that same period, the People's Republic of China provided $9 million. So for every $1 provided by the People's Republic of China, the United States provided $1,200 in humanitarian assistance. I think that shows our partners in the Hemisphere who really cares about them and who really leads with our values and who is really standing by their side.
Thank you, and I like your phrase, leading with our values. Long live the United States. Thank you. I yield back, and now I recognize Congressman Schneider from the state of Illinois for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Salazar. And let me first say thank you. I'm not on this subcommittee, but I'm pleased to be here and allowing me to join you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the fiscal 25 budget priorities that we are here today to discuss. I was just in the region last week. I was in Brazil, Argentina, and Guatemala. The trip was an eye-opener, reinforcing the critical importance of our engagement in Latin America. We had the chance to meet with President Milei and President Arevalo, who both emphasized their appreciation for and commitment to a strong United States relationship. In Buenos Aires, we commemorated the 30th anniversary of the Amia Jewish Center bombing, honoring the victims of this tragic terrorist attack that still has not had justice served. The solemn event reminded us of the enduring threat of anti-Semitism and the need for vigilance and justice. As many of you know, Hezbollah was responsible for the Amia bombing, highlighting the group's capacity for violence and terror beyond the Middle East. This connection is very personal to me, for I have a long history of working to counter Hezbollah's influence, including leading the original Hezbollah International Financing Prevention Act. Hezbollah's activities, including money laundering and drug trafficking, pose a serious threat not only to regional stability in Latin America, but to United States national security. Our experiences on the trip underscore the importance of sustained U.S. engagement in Latin America. Specific priorities protecting our vital interests include addressing and promoting economic opportunities while addressing economic challenges. Dealing with, as was mentioned earlier, the strategic competitors, in particular the PRC, dealing with the effects of climate change and the threats of irregular migration and other issues that are coming from that, and last but not least, dealing with crime and terrorist groups in the region. We have to address democratic resilience. In Guatemala, we met with the president. He talked about the efforts they're taking, and I'd like to touch on that in a second as well. Economic development, our ties with Brazil are robust. Two-way trade is reaching significant levels. Strengthening that relationship will benefit both nations, promoting job creation and sustainable development. Of course, migration management is an issue, and I'll come back to that in a second, but programs are having effect. In Guatemala, we talked about the fact that border crossings are down by 2/3 since 2021. And last, enhancing our efforts to counter Hezbollah's influence in the Americas is crucial. In conclusion, our engagement in Latin America is not just a matter of foreign policy, it's about building a more secure, prosperous, and democratic hemisphere. And that's what the 2025 budget request is all about, and a step in the right direction. So let me start with Acting Assistant Administrator Camilleri. How is USAID addressing the root causes of migration from Central America, particularly in Guatemala? As I mentioned, we've seen a 2/3 decrease, other positive steps, but what should we be looking for?
Thank you, Congressman. We have seen under the root causes strategy, which was launched in 2021, a new level of attention and resources committed to addressing those root causes of migration from Central America. We've now invested almost $30 billion in that strategy, as well as mobilizing the private sector, as Assistant Secretary Nichols mentioned, to the tune of $5.2 billion in additional investment, 50 companies investing to create jobs in the region. So just to give you some examples of the impact of this work under the root causes strategy, in a single year, USAID helped to create or sustain 90,000 jobs. We reached nearly 500,000 youth through support for primary and secondary education. We kept 175,000 children from growing hungry in the region through our nutrition interventions. The question, obviously, that we often get is, what impact is this work, which is having tangible, meaningful effects on local communities and families, what impact is it having on migration? And there, as you alluded to, I think increasingly we have evidence that we are having an impact. We know, for example, that our workforce development interventions in El Salvador showed a 13% decrease in intentions to migrate. We know that in Honduras, our education interventions kept kids in school, and that those higher retention rates are associated with lower irregular migration rates. And more broadly speaking, as you mentioned, we have seen since the launch of the root causes strategy to today, a 2/3 decline in border encounters from the countries of Northern Central America. So when we think about the budget environment we're in, and we hear some of the discussion about potentially significant cuts to USAID's budget for the region, we know what that means. That means fewer kids in school. It means more kids going hungry. It means fewer jobs created. It means fewer women and girls protected from gender-based violence. More broadly in the region, less support for public officials and civil society and journalists who are combating corruption and human rights violations. Coastal communities that are more vulnerable to storms and climate change. So, not to mention our the space for transnational criminal organizations and our strategic competitors in the region. So this is tangible. This is real. This really puts on the table the progress that I think we've made over the last few years under the root causes strategy and more broadly in the region, and would just encourage those of you who have the opportunity to consider these questions to think carefully about the impact that we've had so far and the impact we can continue to have appropriately resourced.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm over time. If I had more time, Assistant Secretary Nichols, I would love to talk more another time about efforts to support work in the region to address corruption, like what we were hearing in Guatemala with great success. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman, for your participation. Now I recognize Congressman Self from Texas for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given the background of repression against matters of conscience, faith, the church in Nicaragua, I want to ask you, and I was also struck with your comment about lead with our values. One of our, in fact, it's in the First Amendment, religious freedom. We have both the Establishment Clause and the Free Expression Clause in our First Amendment. So, and please don't wander into humanitarian, education, migration issues. I want to know about the Biden administration support for religious freedom, matters of conscience, matters of faith. Does the Biden administration support religious liberty in the Western Hemisphere? And I want to hear specifics about how they are supporting. And again, I ask you not to wander into humanitarian, education, or migration issues. I want to hear specifics about the religious freedom, because that is one of our leading values. So what is the Biden administration doing to support religious freedom in the Western Hemisphere?
Thank you very much. The Biden administration has been focused on a country that has, in Nicaragua, that has deeply abused people of faith. going after Mountain Gateway missionaries, for example, and jailing them.
So what does focused on it mean? What are they doing?
So we have repeatedly raised the unfair jailing and abuse of both evangelical and Catholic religious figures in Nicaragua with the Ortega Murillo regime. We continue to advocate for the release of all prisoners of conscience in Nicaragua.
Can you provide me the proof of that? Do you have letters that you could give me? I would like to see the specifics of what you've been doing rather than just a meeting date.
I'll have to consult with my colleagues in the department about providing any specific documentation, but I will absolutely stress that we have raised this on numerous occasions, and we did secure the release of a number of political prisoners, 222 at one time.
These prisoners of faith, or were they political prisoners of different political party? Because again, please refrain your remarks to religious liberty.
So that was a broad spectrum of prisoners, including people of faith. One of the other things I'm very proud of that we've done in the Western Hemisphere is to work to combat anti-Semitism in our hemisphere. I issued a region-wide policy on combating anti-Semitism and directed each of our ambassadors in the field to develop their own anti-Semitism policies. I work hand in hand with Ambassador Lipstadt, and we've persuaded numerous countries in the hemisphere, most recently Paraguay and Guatemala, to name special envoys to combat anti-Semitism, and they signed a joint statement at the anniversary of the Amia bombing.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Nichols. That is combating anti-Semitism. What I'm asking about is religious freedom for the citizens of the Western Hemisphere. It is related, but it is not exactly anti-Semitism. You're combating anti-Semitism. I want to know what you're doing to support religious liberty. That's my question.
So the State Department as a whole reports on international religious freedom in every country around the world. We raise the issues of freedom of religion with governments wherever we are present. We seek out information when there are cases where people of faith or people who choose not to practice a faith are persecuted. We raise that with the host governments.
Okay. I would like to know if you've got any documentation, if you would follow up on when you have actually done it. We can talk generalities all day long. That doesn't answer specifics. I would appreciate it. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Congressman Self, and I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and other materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.